There's a Ask Me Anything in the other room, and I'm humbled that you want to listen to me instead of Ben and Anton. You can still leave if you really want to, but I'm Sander. I come from the Netherlands. I am the lead developer at Fit4Me. We sell food supplements, working with a team from Romania, some from the UK. I also do a lot of community stuff. Magenta Netherlands, the Dutch Unconference, Mage Stack Day. I do it together with, on my left, too bad. And yeah, a lot of other stuff. You can reach me on various social media pages, and you can ask me anything there if you want. That's it about me. It is 2017, and after years of living in our own bubble of monolithic code and old-fashioned design patterns, we are finally stepping into the future. Last 2 years actually has been so exciting. We got Magenta 2, we got stuff like dependency injection, we got stuff like queuing. We're really catching up with the PHP community. It's been amazing. It's been amazing, and one of the things that really captivated me was the whole headless thing going on in multiple communities actually. Yeah, what is headless architecture? It's kind of a buzzword at the moment. There's a lot going on out there. Headless basically means you have a system that is decoupled from the GUI. That's how it was designed, I think, about 10, 12 years ago in Java. The graphical interface of your application wasn't directly linked to the underlying application, and Java would expose a couple of APIs with which you could work. In web design, what it means is basically that you can take the front end off. We already had a presentation on headless from Hatamari. Yes. I have an issue with your guy's name, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Where you take away the front end of the website and you can implement anything you like Vue or Angular or whatever. But in the essence, headless is nothing more than having APIs that enable clients to do multiple tasks over and over again in a way that they are agnostic about the business logic behind it. As an example, if I build an app running on Magento, let's say, I should not be having to care about the price engine if I want to add a product. It shouldn't matter how that works. That is the essence of headless. I tried to do a bit of research into headless, like what the history was, especially for the web. Weirdly enough, there isn't a lot out there on it actually. The Drupal community has been posting a couple of blog posts, which is Dries Buitaert and Jill Koning. They did a couple of posts on how they would make that work in Drupal. Alan Kent, Magento's Alan Kent did a post about it, but that's basically all there is, so it was kind of fascinating. So I wanted to put this into practice. And basically, which one of you has worked with headless? Which one of you guys would like to work with headless but didn't really know where to start or maybe how to get started? Okay, I hope I can be of some help today for you guys. This presentation is basically about me trying to go headless with some failure, some success. It's based on what we are doing at Fit4Me. So it'll be a bit of a use case. There will be some code actually. The code is also available online. I have a link right at the end of the presentation. But yeah, putting headless into practice when dealing with Magento. Now, I think the most common case would be this. You would take Magento, chop off the front end, the knockout part and the UI components part and all that stuff I really don't understand, and you would implement a front end for that, be it React, Angular, Vue, whatever is out there and hip at the moment. Maybe some layer in between there to aggregate some data, and that's how I think most projects are done right now on headless. It is not per se headless, it's decoupled. There is a small difference between it, and it comes down to how many clients are consuming your API, so your server, let's say, which is Magento in this case. I'm not going to talk about this. There are a lot of people here that can give way better presentations about me. You guys, Ricardo the Pesta did an awesome presentation in Italy, I saw it, I think, and he did it in Magento Live UK as well. It's online, and I recommend you take a look at that. I am going to talk about the other side. What if Magento is your head? Crazy. So, at Fit4Me, we have to deal with a lot of systems, like a lot of shops probably do. We have an ERP solution, which is API based, which handles stock positions, it handles invoices, it handles customers for up to a certain level. We have to deal with fulfillment, which is not only, so it's the fulfillment company that actually ships the packages, but they also have internal statuses for those packages and the track and trace. Then we have logging across multiple systems. Our logging is used for some functional stuff as well. And we have stuff like an email server. We're integrated with Dotmailer. So whenever you look at the shop, there is a host of services you are using. And the traditional way, I would say, to implement those services is to get their Magento module and put it in Magento and aggregate the data from there. They normally do this via extra tables or extended tables. It tends to bloat your system as well. It tends to make your system a little less fast, to be honest. And you're basically having to deal with a lot of third-party code, which still is fun, I guess. We could do that. We could go for the fulfillment company's Magento module. It basically generates the whole XML we need to submit, and it does some magic to do some codes that they need. But we have another issue as well. We have a lot of clients actually who use this information that I was talking about. We have the Magento backend, so we have about 50 customer service employees that use the Magento backend to create orders, to answer questions from customers. We have the Magento frontend for those customers who are willing enough to go to our web shop and look at the status of their order instead of calling us. We have a legacy system, unfortunately, in a couple of countries. We have some dashboarding for our finance and logistics departments, and we are working on Magenta 2. It's a long process, but we'll get there. But all these clients have to work in the same way. It's not like our legacy system is submitting an order to the fulfillment company in another way. It's the same shipping method. It's the same logic behind it, and the data returned as well is the same. And actually, a lot of these clients are also the servers, let's say. So the legacy system, we opted to not migrate all the data from our old shop to the new shop. We are using it basically as an API where we query data from, and we will probably do the same between Magento 1 and Magento 2. We will probably use the old Magento 1 instance as a data repository, once we migrate to Magenta 2. Because why would you migrate a lot of static data, a lot of history, if you don't need to? We like to limit the data we move around in our ecosystem as a company. So we started to take a different approach. Magento in this case was central, and it would be client, and it would provide the data. We implemented a basic data warehouse, which sounds a lot more fancy than it is, and at some point it will be, but for now we standardize data in a way that is maybe not so conform Magento itself, but it's easier to work with across different systems. So it's being fed by various services and and what we try to do is base all those services on a certain domain. So one generates a PDF, one would generate XML for fulfillment, one would generate reports for finance, to keep it easy to maintain. Yeah, and isolate data and business logic per domain. So when you look at it, let's say we have a whole list of modules. What we would try to do is take all the business logic from a module and move that to a service. And then make sure that the business logic that was once in Magento is now exposed for all the systems we are using. Well, commonly, especially when you're a solutions partner for Magento, you would try to make Magento fit. You would probably add an extra API to Magento to expose that data. For us, it didn't seem the right approach. It basically looks a bit like this. So the most important part in this is that we do deal with external services, but there's always a layer in between. There is a risk here. You are chaining APIs, and whenever you chain APIs, it's hard to debug, and you introduce some, well, basically it's dependencies, and something might fill here and not work there. I'll get back to that later on. We introduced a gateway to manage this. I will talk briefly more about it later, but basically you will need that at some point. But this is kind of what we ended up with right now. So in short, we have a source. We will introduce a service that is a consumer of that data, which will basically only be an endpoint that stores data. And then we have a server that serves out. It's important to note that neither one of those will actually do any business logic, will actually manipulate any data. When you're dealing with data, rarely you need it real time. The consumer will store the data, and you will work with cron jobs or tasks, or like for example RabbitMQ, and you will have jobs manipulating the data for what you want it to have. This way you make sure that any call you place to your system, to your middleware from either Magento or another client, it'll be fast. And it'll be consistent across the board. So whenever you change an API, the data stored is already data mutated, so it won't change. Which results in normalized and combined data. You get stable APIs for clients, and it insulates from future changes. This sounds like a lot of overhead. Why would we go through such lengths? We're writing a lot of extra code actually, and I can vouch for that. You're going to be writing at least 2 times more code to get this done. It's worth it in the end. It'll, even for smaller clients, I wouldn't go out and say just port any module you have to a service, definitely not. But for any bigger service you are running, even if you deliver it to multiple clients, it helps to keep stuff simple. So now a bit of the practical side, the incoming data. Keep it simple. We decided to go for PHP, and I know some of you might not agree with that. And Node is cooler, of course. We decided to use PHP because we know it. It's easier to onboard developers on, since we are a PHP team basically, and that's where our knowledge lies. Yeah, and we decided that we would try to build as the least possible libraries we have. We want to use community stuff that's already out there. And there really is a solution for anything you can think of. Once you start Googling for something, trust me, there is already someone who tried it before. The PSR protocols are important. Find libraries that adhere to it, because it'll make sure that it works with any framework you might want to introduce. Don't overcomplicate dependency injection. We are dealing with a small service here, and dependency injection is good. It's useful in this case for logging, for caching, maybe for whatever. But at the end of the day, write your code to be thrown away, not to be refactored. It's a lot easier. I think overall code should be not worth refactoring, just start over again on the basis of what you've written before. Think careful about what you need and spend time finding the best option. Don't start just writing, start drawing first. We use a lot of event storming sessions in our company, which is basically a blank wall with a lot of post-its, and we get stakeholders in to actually map out what we're doing. And from that we will start discerning domain objects and services, smaller and smaller, and we will start building those services to fit exactly the need of the business at that moment. We don't build for scaling, not in a feature kind of way, so we can run a service on multiple nodes, but we don't think about stuff that will happen in half a year. If that happens, we will rewrite it. And that way you make sure that you don't go overboard with making a very complicated system that in the end doesn't really do that much. It limits overhead. So what we went with is Slim PHP for routing and DI. I love this framework. It's a personal preference, but it gives you just enough to work with. Another one is Zend. I think Jisse mentioned it. Zend has a new service where you can...
Expressive?
Yes, expressive, exactly. It basically starts with nothing, and then you can start introducing what you want. And it's a great way to think about what you're actually using. I started out with Lumen for my microservices, because that felt very lightweight, coming from Magento. And then looking back half a year later, I'm like, man, it's bloated, because it has all these concepts that I'm never going to use. So try to find something that uses the least minimal functionality. Monologue for logging, I don't think there's a better alternative out there, to be honest. For caching, there is a PHP Friends library, which has lots of adapters. Guzzle to call APIs over HTTP. Illuminati database, I did a lot with Laravel, so that's why I went for the Laravel database ORM. Again, personal preference. Use mostly what your team knows. Not just you, but look at what your team knows and build on that. Insert on duplicate, that's what you need for Illuminati database. Symfony console, because we use a lot of command line stuff. And then, since we put a lot of data from Magento, There's a great OAuth 1 client for Magento, and it integrates REST. We tried steering away from SOAP. So we had to build a lot of REST APIs extra to get the data we wanted, but it just made life a lot easier, to be honest. Yeah. As I said, it's so this is kind of like a Bootstrap project we use as a basis, but keep it simple. You don't want to have a lot of code. Actually, the screenshot you see here is already quite obsolete. I should have updated that. We already changed the structure, but it's we keep the projects as small as possible so we can change around, and any new idea we find out, we'll try to incorporate in that. I did make a lot of mistakes. Actually, the team made a lot of mistakes with me. It was coming from Magento. I've done Magento for 7 or 8 years now. You are kind of working in a certain way where you don't think about keeping applications small or lightweight. It's more like building a lot of functionalities. Single purpose. Don't be afraid to have a ridiculous amount of services out there that just do one thing. It really helps the maintainability, and it really helps the scaling, because once you introduce multiple kinds of features into a service, let's say the fulfillment service would also generate a PDF, for example. Once you do that, the moment that generating a PDF becomes too heavy on the server, you have to scale the whole thing and not just PDF creation or even refactor that. The more single purpose you make a service, the easier coupling it gives you. So we can easily swap out our PHP-based PDF creation at the moment for something based on Python, which is a lot easier or a lot less heavy to do. It should feel overly simple. Anytime I write a service, there are about 5 to 10 classes in there, and the classes are like the services might contain some business logic, but in general it's embarrassing how simple each service is. And actually onboarding developers, I think we run about 15 services now, with another 5 in kind of a prototype state. It takes us about 2 hours to run developers through all the services, and they should know what they do, because we keep them simple, and anytime they become too complex, we start breaking them up again. I think that's the key when you build these kinds of systems. Within the service, it's single purpose, but you have separate tasks, do separate them. Make a different class, a different service class for them. Make sure your classes are as small as possible. It's fine if they just have one function, but keep separating out. Document a lot. Confluence, write comments. Make sure you mention Jira tickets while you did something. The thing is that you are working with multiple services, and anytime you change something in the way you approach a certain issue, perhaps, you won't be able to update all the services because it takes too much time, and that's fine. You can have basically any service you launch is already legacy, and at some point you either have too much time or it starts bothering you, and you kill it and you build a new service. But that means you have to document a lot to make sure that you know what a service is doing, you know where the responsibility for certain tasks lay, so that you can easily debug. So yeah, that's really important. Then integration tests for API endpoints. I'm fine with you not doing unit testing or whatever. Just write integration tests. Basically, it means that you make sure that the endpoint of a certain server, of a certain service, returns the same stuff over and over again. So when you refactor something, let's say something in your finance middleware that generates a batch and enriches it with some Magento data, for example, it does include the increment ID. And you don't have to care about how it works, just make sure it includes increment ID. It's the easiest way of testing, I guess. And then log everything. Your services will fail just because they interact with services outside of your ecosystem. There's a lot of moving parts. A server may be down and you didn't think about replication. Make sure you log everything and you log it in a sensible way so you don't overlog stuff with every notice in there. I can recommend a service like Logly or Logstash with Kibana or something like that, which aggregates all the logs into one timeline, let's say it. What we find commonly is that our customer service will say, hey, something doesn't work in the backend, and we find it somewhere like 3 services deep. It really helps to have a timeline with all the logging events that kind of give you a certain context to an issue. You don't want to go through all the servers and view the logs independently. And then exposing data. Do separate those two, even in your technical implementation. Even if it's the same service, just make sure you have different classes for that. Because the way you consume incoming data and maybe mutate any data you get will change a lot more from the way you expose the data actually. So the things that we wanted to have in there is read-only. So any API that exposes data, the whole endpoint, let's say, is only read-only. It should be easy to integrate with various systems, so with Magento consuming it, with a legacy system consuming it. It should offer sorting, filtering, and a host of other query options. Be very fast and standardized and easily scalable. Pretty obvious stuff, I guess. Standardizing. Do we really want to standardize the output of all those APIs across all the services? What kind of format do you want? Should it be all the same? Well, we work with Magenta 1, where we have grids actually consuming our APIs. It's an internal module that is not yet pretty enough to be released to the outside world, as in there's a lot of hacking in there. But we actually have Magenta 1 grids that in a unified way consume an API output the way they would consume a collection. It's actually a collection in Magento. That was possible because we adapted the API output of that service to it, to the way Magento handles filtering, to the way Magento handles searching. So you could go for a standardized approach, but then you would lose that. I do think that there's a balance there to be found. Not every API, especially if it's internal, you don't need to standardize all the output all the time. Yeah, there was communication between services, which we use some non-standardized ways for. So we were thinking about GraphQL, for example. I'll come back to that later. At the end of the day, it wasn't fit for us, to be honest. And then caching. How dynamic is dynamic content, and do we need to cache everything? Think about a strategy up front. No data ever has to be that dynamic. Nothing has to be real time. So think about when something should be invalidated. If a price gets updated, do you really want to propagate that through all your services instantaneously? Or is it okay to say to business, hey, listen up, we have price changes once a day, for example, because they will make a mistake and then change it the second time, and then your cache will be invalidated for a second time. We had stuff like that. It isn't fun because your whole service infrastructure takes a plunge. And then who does the caching? Is it the client? do they cache? Do they make sure that they only ask for the data when they need to? Or should it be your API that actually does caching, that catches any request and then sees if it should query the database or just return some static content there? There is a solution in Magenta too. Again, from the gentleman sitting all the way in the back, Ricardo Tempesta. He made a Magenta 2 API enhancer that does caching on the client side. Yeah, client side. It's awesome. You should try it out. That's kind of where we are right now, with a lot of learnings, a lot of different services. Some are, after a year and a half, some we already want to change, to be honest. We're not happy about them, but they're easy change. It's something we can do in a couple of days. And we do have a wish list and some ideas where we want to go with this. So in all this, we are using mostly MariaDB and Elastic. MariaDB is easy. There is definitely no other reason or no easier solution for relational database. And it's up to 1 terabyte of data. It's fine. The performance will be good. And Elastic has already has a REST output, and it's pretty much plug and play. There are some pretty good libraries out there, and you don't need to do that much to get it to work. In the future, though, we want to go over to maybe Redshift, Google BigQuery. The reason why we didn't do that right now is simply time, I guess, and effort we needed to put in there. We had less knowledge of these services, and we want to focus first on creating the services and the way we handle those microservices, and not take a deep dive into all these new kinds of technologies before we really understood what we were using them for. Because right now I don't have any reason to use Redshift, for example, other than they have a cool logo, because I don't have that much data. And then hosting. So you're thinking microservices, I should get some Amazon hosting, I should have some terraforming there, I should put them on different services and stuff like that. No, we went with a dedicated VPS that actually runs some Nginx. There is maybe some Docker there, but basically all our services run on one server. And it works fine, actually, because the services aren't that heavy. So we can, I think only fulfillment runs on its own service, but that was since a month, I think. So it's fine to put everything on one server if you're more comfortable with that. If you don't have the DevOps in-house to go to the distributed system, which I would like to go to, but again, there wasn't really a reason to go there yet. And we didn't have the tool for that. And then an API gateway. I mentioned it when I show you the drawing of our infrastructure. We did introduce an API gateway, and that's you will get to a point where you have 10 services and it's a mess with endpoints and you have no clue how to maintain it. And then API gateway starts to make sense because it gives you one place to admin all those endpoints and to point them to different services. And let's say you replace a service, you can just point it in a different direction. It'll do some caching for you, it'll do some rate limiting for you, for example. But you don't need to go with something fancy. Nginx actually has a blog on how to build an API gateway with Nginx configuration. I think it just needs 1 or 2 modules extra. There is another blog on microservice.io that talks about, I think, GetCon. It's a really cool service that you can use. There are a lot of solutions out there that are pretty simple. There are SaaS solutions that are fully administrated. I don't think we will ever get to the size where that will be interesting for us personally. which is, for example, Taikio. Amazon has a service for that, so if you're on Amazon, that would make sense to go that way. But yeah, Kong has a free plugin into Nginx that actually does a lot of API gateway methods for you. And then, as I mentioned, GraphQL as Swagger. We looked into mainly GraphQL. It's nice, I really like it, but it introduced a lot of complexity. For most of our API or most of our services only have 2 or 3 API endpoints, and then those endpoints are a lot of times used by very specific clients. Maybe if we would open source all our services, it would make sense, but at this point it doesn't, because GraphQL does not work well with a Magenta 1 grid, for example. So we're not even sure if we're gonna switch over to that. We would have to have a very good reason for that. Yeah, so summary of all this. By offloading your tasks from Magento, you keep it lightweight, you keep it simple. I'm not saying you should offload everything, but as soon as a module starts to get bigger and bigger and you notice it's becoming a bottleneck, it's definitely a candidate to be moved over to a service. Storing data in a central place. You can go with databases per service, or you can start looking at a central database where they all store their service. That has a lot of benefits because you can start aggregating data over different services. Again, it introduces a lot of complexity, so think about it. Yeah, Headless can. So the first Headless integration I think we did was simply the status of the order in Magento at up to processing. It came from Magento, and then it was actually dictated by our fulfillment web service we built. So it can be a very simple line that you are already using, but that eliminated a lot of back and forth communication between Magento and the fulfillment company that we didn't want anyway. So it made life a lot easier. Yeah, and just start lightweight. Don't go with Symfony or something like that. It'll be bloated. Choose a small framework that gets you back to the essence of what you're doing and doesn't constrain you in technology. And that's it. The join in link doesn't work for this conference. Please go to your apps to rate me. All the code I was talking about, like the boilerplate service we built, is on my GitHub. You can ask me anything on Twitter or GitHub. There's a video over there of Ricardo talking about a React.js frontend, which I can highly recommend. And that is my presentation. If you have any questions, you can ask them now, or I will be around.
I suggest we wait with questions for the coffee break because we are running out of time.
I am so sorry to all of you.
The next